My father told everyone I was the family disappointment, until my co-owner called. I'll never forget that night. The table was full, the wine was flowing, and the conversations were shallow, as they always were at our family gatherings. I had just turned 25. My brother Michael was the center of attention, as always, bragging about his promotion at the investment firm our father built from the ground up. My mother smiled, politely detached, and my aunt, his sister, kept asking why I hadn't settled down yet, and then came the moment. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from, and if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. My father tapped his glass and stood, holding court like he always did. To family, he said, to tradition, and to those of us who carry the name with pride. He looked around the table and then let his eyes land directly on me. And even to those who, while disappointing, will hopefully find their way eventually. The room went quiet. Everyone froze. I didn't say a word. I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't defend myself. I just stood up, pushed my chair back, and walked out. No one followed me. No one called me the next day, not even my mother. From that night forward, I stopped trying to be part of that family. They always made me feel like a mistake, like I was occupying a space that didn't belong to me. I was the creative one in a world where only numbers mattered. I didn't want to work at the family's investment bank, didn't want to wear their suits or adopt their rehearsed smiles. I had just left a position at a small data analytics firm, and I was working on an idea of my own, something in predictive modeling for financial risk. But to them, that sounded like a failure in progress. They called it playing with data. My father actually laughed when I once mentioned machine learning. Real business isn't built on toys, he said. It's built on discipline, hierarchy, and capital. I moved to a smaller apartment after that night, a one-bedroom above a laundromat in Chicago. The walls were thin and the heat barely. Worked, but it was mine. I stopped checking their social media posts. I changed my number. I stopped explaining myself to people who never listened. For a long time, nothing happened. I worked. I read everything I could. I studied models, statistics, financial markets, behaviors. I taught myself code, not because it was trendy, but because it was the only way I could afford to build what I needed. I pitched my ideas to 3 small firms. 2 laughed, 1 didn't answer, but then 1 didn't laugh. It was a minor fintech group, barely known outside a niche circle, but they understood what I was building. They offered seed funding. I worked like a machine. I barely slept. I learned to speak like a founder, like someone people took seriously. I built a team, got an office, found clients. 3 years later, we launched the platform. It didn't make headlines. It didn't trend, but it worked. Our system predicted market shifts before most banks even realized something was changing. Quietly, hedge funds started using us, then a few private banks. Then slowly, we started getting calls from the same circles that once wouldn't return an email. Still, I never used my last name. I never told anyone who my family was. I wanted the work to speak. By the time I was 33, we had 2 rounds of funding, a new office in New York, and a growing list of clients that included companies my father once bragged about working with. I had almost forgotten about him entirely until the call came. It was from my co-founder, Elena. She handled the legal and corporate structuring, and she sounded different that morning. Serious. "Laura," she said, "you're going to want to sit down." She had just come out of a meeting. A fund we were in talks with had connections to an acquisition, a quiet one, of a controlling interest in a legacy financial group, my father's group. "What do you mean?" I asked. She paused. "The fund just finalized a quiet buy-in, strategic. Acquisition, and they want us to manage the data side of the restructuring." It didn't hit me at first. Then I opened the documents. There in the ownership details, buried deep in the portfolio strategy, was the name of the fund that had just bought controlling shares in my father's firm. Not a flashy event. No cameras. Just key staff, contributors, and long-term collaborators. Elena asked me to speak. I didn't want to at first, but I agreed. I stood at the front of the room and looked at the people who had built Argonne with me. Most of them didn't know my last name. Most didn't care. That's why I chose them. I don't have a speech, I said. People waited. No one moved. I just want to say thank you. We built something they said couldn't be done. We built it quietly. We built it right, and we did it without having to explain ourselves to anyone who refused to see us. That was it. After the summit, I returned to my office. I looked out the window, the city moving without pause, without recognition, and I felt it. Not pride, not victory, peace. The kind that comes not when you're seen, but when you stop needing to be. The balance sheet had settled, and I was still here, quiet, standing, unshaken. After dessert, I stood. I didn't wait for goodbyes. I didn't force anything. As I crossed the room, my father looked up. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. At the front door, Aunt Helen touched my arm. "Thank you for coming," she said. Nodded. She hesitated. "I always believed in you, you know. I just didn't know how to help." "You didn't have to," I said. "You just had to not stand in the way." She nodded. "Fair." I left. Outside, the air was colder than expected. I walked down the driveway slowly, not because I was thinking of anything in particular, but because it felt like something had closed, not a chapter. The whole book. The family that once used me as an example of failure now had to sit in silence, while I passed through their rooms, and they said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. A month after the dinner, the final paperwork came in. It was the formal termination of the Whitmore Family Trust. The document was clean, no contingencies. Everything had been consolidated into Argonne. Titles, accounts, assets, names, all absorbed. There was no final clause, no tribute to legacy. Just a line that marked the end. Transferred with no restrictions. It was the last piece. I signed it, closed the file, and sent it to legal for archiving. After that, I didn't think about it again. We moved forward. We always moved forward. The company had expanded into 4 more international markets. Trace, our predictive system, was now integrated into institutional risk management for several central banks. We had launched a second platform focused on behavioral analytics. I rarely had to attend meetings anymore. I chose the ones I cared about. The rest were handled by people I trusted. That was the point, not just to build something, but to build something that didn't need me in every room. Elena ran most of the operational side now. She had grown the team from a tight 10-person unit into an organization of over 400 people. People who didn't know the name Whitmore. People who didn't care. To them, I was just Laura, founder, architect, leader. One afternoon, I walked past a glass conference room during a demo session for new hires. The trainer pointed at the timeline on the screen. "This is where the company pivoted to full autonomy," she said. "This is where Argonne stopped chasing the market and started defining it." She didn't mention my father. She didn't mention my family. She didn't need to. In the hallway, I saw Michael. He was standing at the end of the corridor, waiting for a meeting. He'd been integrated into the Argonne structure over the past year, handling client strategy. He was competent, respectful, and quiet. We never discussed anything personal. He didn't try to reclaim our past. That was fine with me. He saw me and gave a slight nod. I returned it. We didn't speak. And then one day, I received a call from the hospital. Not a secretary. Not a nurse, my mother. Her voice was slower than I remembered. "Laura," she said, "he's asking for you." I knew who she meant. I asked for the room number and hung up. I didn't ask how long he had. I didn't ask what was wrong. I went. The hospital was plain, functional, private, no branding, the kind of place that handled quiet endings. The nurse led me in. My father was awake, sitting up slightly, a tray of untouched food in front of him. His hands looked thinner. The room smelled like disinfectant. He looked at me and didn't speak for the first few seconds. Then, "I thought you might not come. I didn't answer." He shifted. "I don't want to talk about the business." "Good," I said. "I don't want to talk about what happened either." "Then what do you want?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he looked toward the window. You built something that mattered. I waited. That's all, he said. I nodded. All right. I turned to leave. He spoke again, quieter. I didn't know you'd go that far. I paused at the door. You didn't look. He didn't respond. I left the room. I didn't go back. A week later, I received a notice from the hospital. He had passed during the night. There was no funeral. That was his choice. No service, no announcement, just a legal note and a transfer of records. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel grief. It felt like a line drawn under a column. Final. Total. No credits, no losses, just closed. Weeks passed. At the end of that quarter, we held a partner summit. Because the most powerful thing I ever did was walk away and build something bigger than them, without ever needing their permission. It had been almost a year since the acquisition, and no one referred to the company by my father's name anymore. Internally, the old firm was now just a segment. Argonne absorbed the systems, replaced the infrastructure, realigned the workforce. We kept a few key people, but most of the legacy team had either left or been reassigned. The board no longer included anyone with the last name Whitmore. Even in the external communications, the language shifted. Where it once said Whitmore Financial, now it said Argonne Private. That was intentional. No press release announced the change. No article celebrated it. It just happened, quietly, efficiently, and yet it was everywhere. Our name was now on the reports that reached national regulators. Our models drove recommendations across institutions that once dismissed us as irrelevant. Former critics now cited our white papers. In panels, people referenced our systems without hesitation. It didn't happen because I asked to be seen. It happened because they no longer had a choice. I hadn't heard from my father since the day he came to my office. That wasn't surprising. He never liked repeating himself, and in his mind, the matter had likely been closed the moment I refused to give him back control. What did surprise me was the message that arrived in late March. It wasn't from him. It came from a name I hadn't heard in over 10 years, Aunt Helen. She had always played the role of buffer in the family. Polite, passive, careful. She never stood up for me, but she never ridiculed me either. At dinners, she asked questions no one else bothered to ask. She remembered my birthday. She once gave me a book on economic theory with a handwritten note, "Keep reading, even if they don't understand what you're reading." I hadn't spoken to her since the night of that dinner. The message was short. Laura, your mother's 70th birthday is next month. There will be a dinner. I think you should come. No speeches. No drama. Just come. Helen, I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone down. I didn't respond that day. I didn't owe my mother anything. She had watched it all happen. The public insult, the years of silence, the erasure, and said nothing. And when I built my company, when I began to appear in trade news, she didn't reach out. But the letter she'd sent months earlier still sat in a drawer at my desk. I should have stood up for you more. That sentence had stayed with me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time she ever acknowledged the gap between what she did and what she should have done. I told Elena I needed one night off. She looked at me for a second, didn't ask why, and said, "Okay." The dinner was being held at the old Whitmore estate, a place I hadn't seen since I was in my 20s. It had the same polished look, the same manicured hedges, the same sense of control. Everything looked expensive and restrained. I arrived 15 minutes after the start time. Inside, the house was filled with familiar voices. Michael was there, of course, now firmly settled in his new position and fully aware of who he worked. For a few cousins I hadn't seen since college hovered around a cheese table. My mother stood near the fireplace, smiling faintly, dressed in muted tones, and then I saw him, my father. He was sitting in an armchair at the far end of the room. He looked smaller, not sick, just less. The posture was still upright, but the energy was different. He didn't speak. He just watched. I didn't greet him. Aunt Helen met me at the door and guided me into the room. A few heads turned. No one said much. I took a seat at the corner of the table, as far from the center as possible. Dinner began. People talked about safe things: real estate, summer plans, market rumors. I didn't join, I listened. And for the first time in years, the room seemed aware of me, not out of courtesy, out of discomfort, because I was the one they'd written off, the one they whispered about. And now I was the one whose company ran the very foundation of their old empire. My mother looked at me once, halfway through the meal, and gave a soft nod. That was it. No one toasted, no one spoke about the business, no one said my name, and that was the moment I realized I didn't need any of them to. They knew. But it had become clear that the only way to build what I wanted was to do it without pretending the old way still worked. Michael was adapting, slowly. He stopped trying to pretend things hadn't changed. He wasn't warm, but he was professional. He did what he was told when I gave direction. He handled the legacy firm's integration into Argonne's infrastructure with minimal friction. I respected that. I didn't trust him, but I respected the effort. One Thursday morning, I walked into the executive review meeting prepared to go over Q1 performance. We were exceeding projections on every metric. Adoption rates of Trace were higher than we'd anticipated. Retention among institutional clients had broken our own internal benchmarks. The software was now embedded into 3 major international banks, and we had just closed a deal with a firm in Singapore. It was all working. The model was scaling. I had just finished presenting when one of the senior advisors raised a hand. "There's a matter you might want to see directly," he said. "A request came in from the Whitmore Family Trust. They're proposing a restructuring of the estate's remaining shares." My hand stayed still. I kept my eyes on the screen in front of me. What kind of restructuring? They're offering to divest remaining shares of the private holdings, including the family office, and roll them into the Argonne Development Fund. Full exit. Clean transfer. No conditions. No conditions. That meant they were done. They wanted out. I didn't ask who had signed the request. I already knew. I nodded. "Send it to legal. We'll move forward." That was it. No ceremony, no press release. No final conversation. The firm, the estate, the name, all of it consolidated, and no one in the room seemed to realize the weight of that moment. Later that day, Elena stepped into my office and closed the door. She didn't sit. "You good?" she asked. "I'm fine. That was something," she said. "After everything." "Yeah." She waited. I didn't give her anything else. Eventually, she nodded and left. I wasn't fine, not in the emotional sense, but not broken either. It just felt finished. That weekend, Michael emailed me. He said he was moving, not far, just out of the city. He said he needed a break, something quieter. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't mention the trust or the transfer, just a single line that stood out. I still remember what Dad said at that dinner. I didn't speak up. I should have. I stared at the message for a long time before closing the laptop. I didn't reply, not because I didn't believe him, but because it didn't change anything. I didn't need his guilt. I didn't need his memory. The next few weeks were uneventful, in the way only stability can be. Our systems ran, clients renewed, expansion teams moved into new markets. And every so often, someone on our team would bring up the Whitmore firm, usually in passing, usually forgetting what it used to mean. It was just another line item now. One afternoon, while reviewing internal documentation, I came across a folder that had been mislabeled. Inside were scanned copies of older company archives, likely from a transfer during the integration process. Financial reports, memos, board minutes from the early 2000s. And then I saw it, a scanned page from the night of that dinner. My father had written out the speech he gave. Word for word, it was all there, the toasts, the exact sentence. And even to those who, while disappointing, will hopefully find their way eventually. He had prepared it. It wasn't off the cuff. It wasn't heat of the moment. He had planned to humiliate me. I sat there for a minute, reading the page over and over. It didn't hurt, not in the way it once would have, but it confirmed what I had always known, that the erasure had been intentional. The disregard wasn't emotional. It was strategic. He never thought I'd matter, never thought I'd last. and certainly never thought I'd end up at the helm of the very world he thought belonged only to him. That night, I took the page and folded it once. I didn't keep it. I dropped it into the shred bin by the door. There was nothing left to prove. Nothing left to win. The people who used to overlook me now waited for my decisions. The room that once ignored me now echoed with my name. And yet, I still chose to remain quiet. His eyes didn't settle anywhere for long. "You could have told us," he said. "You already told me who I was," I replied. There wasn't much left to say. He shifted in his seat. "You were young. I didn't mean everything I said." "You meant enough of it." He exhaled slowly. "You built something strong. I built it because you said I couldn't." There was a long pause. Neither of us moved. "I'm not here to apologize," he said. "I don't believe in rewriting history just because things change." I nodded. "I didn't expect you to." He leaned forward. "But I am here because I recognize what you've built, and I think we should talk about what's next." That was the real reason he came. Not family. Not reconciliation. Leverage, positioning, strategy. "The deal is already done," I reminded him. "Argonne owns part of the fund. The fund owns your firm. What comes next is already moving." He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. "I don't want conflict." "You won't get it from me," I said. "You're the one who built your firm around hierarchy. You know how it works. You've been on top long enough to know that power shifts." He stayed quiet again. When he finally stood, he looked at me one last time. "You're different," he said. "No," I replied. "You just never paid attention." He walked out without another word. That afternoon, we had a board call with the fund overseeing the restructuring of the legacy group. I didn't bring up the visit. I didn't mention his name. I focused on numbers, performance, transition planning. That's what made it worse for him. Not rage, not drama. Just indifference. The following week, my mother reached out. It came in the form of a letter. Not an email, not a call. A letter. Handwritten, no return address, just a P.O. box. I recognized the handwriting before I opened it. She said she had watched the press conference online. Said she didn't know whether to cry or feel ashamed. Said that maybe both were the right answer. She never said she was sorry, but she wrote, "I should have stood up for you more." And that was the closest she'd ever come. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, I wasn't, but because I didn't see what would come of it. There was no going back. Only forward. A few months later, Argonne launched a new tool, one that offered real-time market risk assessments using adaptive models trained on live behavior. We called it Trace. It changed everything. Investors moved, clients shifted, and, quietly, the firm that once belonged to my father became dependent on it. Our system didn't just guide the firm, it guarded it. He must have known that. Because he stopped showing up. I read in a trade article that he'd stepped down from his executive role. Officially, they said it was strategic transition, a phrase that meant exactly nothing. Michael, now serving as a liaison between Argonne and the Legacy Group, sent me short updates from time to time. Just logistics. We didn't talk about family. We didn't talk about what happened. One evening, he included a note at the end of an email. "Dad's not taking it well. He talks about you a lot." I didn't reply. I had work to do. One day, our firm hosted a roundtable with international analysts. Elena wanted me to speak. I said no. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to be seen. That was the part they never understood. I didn't build Argonne to prove anything. I built it because I believed in what it could be. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them remember how they all looked past me. Now they had to look again. It started gradually, like most structural changes in companies that used to think they were too big to be touched. There was no announcement, no memo. But the patterns were clear if you knew where to look. I saw it in the call requests. Suddenly, board members who used to route everything through Elena were asking to meet directly with me. I saw it in the questions during quarterly reviews, more focused, more deferential, and I saw it in the silence coming from my father after His visit to our office, he disappeared from all internal firm discussions. Michael stopped mentioning him. His name, which used to be spoken with weight in every meeting, was now just a line in the firm's founding documents. That was how these things happened. Quietly. Effectively. I didn't celebrate it. I had no interest in dismantling anything. My goal had never been to destroy his name. He never once mentioned that the only reason his firm had survived the last year was because of the buyout. I watched him closely. Every word calculated, every gesture familiar. Then he introduced the core innovation partner, the company, leading the firm into the next era of financial intelligence, Argonne, and when the presenter asked me to stand, I did. The room clapped. Polite, empty clapping. A few people tried to catch my eye, others glanced at their phones, but then came the real shift. My father saw me. He didn't react at first, he kept reading from the teleprompter, but I saw it, a flicker. His eyes darted to my table, then quickly away. He hadn't known. The man who spent a lifetime calculating risk hadn't realized I'd been building the very system now holding his empire together. After the speeches, there was a break for dinner. I stayed seated. I didn't need to mingle. They came to me, executives, board members, advisors, people who once called me naive, or worse, who never bothered to learn my name. Now they asked questions about our technology, our forecasts. They praised our discretion. They complimented the speed of integration. I answered plainly with facts. I didn't mention my family. I didn't try to make anyone uncomfortable until Michael finally noticed me. He walked up with a drink in his hand, paused, stared, and then gave a short laugh. "Laura?" he asked. I nodded. He looked around. You're with Argonne?" "I am Argonne." His face changed. He blinked fast, looked toward the stage where our logo was still glowing on the screen, then back at me. "You're part of this?" I didn't respond. He sat down at the table, suddenly less confident than he had been with his entourage earlier. "Dad didn't know," he said. "None of us did." "I know." He leaned in, trying to recover his composure. "You should have told us." "You wouldn't have listened." He had nothing to say after that. Eventually, the host came by to invite key partners for a photo. Op with the leadership team. I was asked to join. I walked to the front of the room. My father was already there. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time in nearly a decade. There was no anger, no apology, just disbelief. Like the version of me standing in front of him didn't make sense. He extended a hand stiffly. I shook it. We took the photo. Flash, applause, silence. Then I stepped away and left the room before dessert. I didn't owe anyone a goodbye, and no one dared to call me a disappointment again. After I left the event, I didn't look back. I walked, straight through the lobby, past the valet line, and ordered a car from the sidewalk. The night was cold, but I didn't feel it. My phone buzzed a few times, texts from Elena, 2 missed calls from a number I recognized but hadn't seen in years. Michael. I didn't answer. I had said everything I needed to without saying anything. At all. When I got home, I didn't pour a drink or open a laptop or replay the night in my head. I took off my suit, folded it carefully, and placed it back in the garment bag. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Not for a call, not for a reaction, just for everything to settle. It took 3 days for the first real fallout to begin. Talker 4. Monday morning, our front desk received an unannounced visitor. My father. He didn't ask for a meeting. He didn't even try to go through anyone. He showed up at our office in New York and told the receptionist he wanted to speak with me directly. Elena was the one who called me to let me know he was there. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was confused. "Laura, should I send him away?" "No," I said. "Give him a coffee and tell him I'll be down in 10. I didn't rush. I let him wait. When I stepped into the small glass conference room where he was seated, he stood, but didn't extend a hand this time. He looked around. "This is your place?" he asked. "It is." He sat back down. "It's quiet. Clean." I didn't build it for show. He didn't respond. He was trying to read me, but he couldn't. The man who once knew how to control every room now sat across from a version of me he had never imagined, not because I changed, but because he never bothered to see me in the first place. "I didn't know you were behind it," he said finally. "I know." He kept looking at the walls, the furniture, the screen on, the wall showing rolling data models from our main dashboard. And the lead consultancy? My company, my team, my name. They didn't know it yet. They had no idea the same daughter they called a disappointment had just stepped into ownership, by merit, not by blood. I sat there for a long time. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. It wasn't about revenge. It was about gravity. About how things fall into place when you stop chasing people who were never really looking for you. That night, I received an invitation. A formal one. A black tie celebration was being hosted by the firm, my father's firm. A new strategic vision was being unveiled. They were inviting partners, investors, and media. The name of my company was listed in the gold-trimmed invitation as core partner. I read it 3 times. Then I told Elena I'd go, let them see. Not because I wanted to say anything, but because I didn't need to say anything at all. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not Elena, not my assistant, not even my head of legal, who usually handled all our high-profile appearances. I didn't want a press team. I didn't want a name tag with CEO in bold. I just wanted to walk in, stand where they stood, and let the room speak for itself. The event was at the Sherwood. Grand, classic marble lobby, floor-to-ceiling glass chandeliers, a valet line with more cameras than cars. It was the kind of place my family had always loved. Over the top, but framed as traditional. A way to flaunt wealth and call it legacy. I arrived 10 minutes before the reception officially started. I didn't wear red or anything too flashy. Just a dark blue suit with sharp lines. I let my hair down. No jewelry beyond the small silver ring I always wore, the same one I bought for myself after our first funding round. It was the only thing I ever bought to celebrate. As I walked in, the air was exactly as I remembered it from family events. Polished, hollow, every conversation rehearsed, laughter slightly louder than it needed to be, people scanning badges to decide who was worth acknowledging. I walked past 2 former partners of my father's firm, men I had met briefly in my early 20s, back when I still tried to understand that world. Neither recognized me. One glanced at me, nodded, and moved on. That didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how many people at the event had no idea who the new strategic partner actually was. They had been told the company name. Our brand was listed on signage, slides, and press kits, but most didn't know it was me behind it. That was intentional. When we'd negotiated the partnership through the fund, everything had gone through corporate arms and representatives. My name had never been front-facing. At the bar, I saw my brother Michael first. He was talking to a group of younger executives, probably mid-level partners, judging by their suits and posture. He looked older than I remembered, thinner. His voice was the same, though, confident, loud, trying to control the rhythm of the room. He didn't see me. I didn't approach. Instead, I walked to the edge of the ballroom, where I could see the seating chart on a digital board. My company, Argonne Analytics, had its own reserved table. Front right, near the stage, and right across from it, the table with a placard labeled The Whitmore Family. I stared at it for a second. The last name that used to belong to me? Technically, it still did, but not in any way that mattered. I found a seat at my table. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I wanted to observe. The room began to fill. Waitstaff floated between guests with trays of champagne and miniature crab cakes. A woman at my table introduced herself as a regional VP from one of the legacy banks that now licensed our software. She talked politely, clearly unsure if I was someone important or just staff. She asked if I worked for Argonne or for one of their legal firms. I founded it, I said simply. Her eyes widened. She nodded quickly, straightened her posture, and asked if I had any idea who the new lead investor behind the acquisition was. I didn't answer, just smiled slightly and sipped my water. When the lights dimmed and the speakers began, my father was the second person to take the stage. He looked exactly as he always had. Perfect tie, clean shave, that calm, controlling presence he used like a weapon. He opened with a joke, people laughed, and then transitioned into the importance of evolution and embracing technology.